Speaking now to the Chief Director at the National Disaster Management Center, Jurgens Dyssel, who joins us on the line. Jurgen, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. At the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, I mean, are you caught off guard by these events? It's becoming clearer and clearer that more and more severe weather-related disasters are hitting the country.
Good morning. I don't think that we can classify it as saying that we are caught unaware. We work very closely with the South African Weather Service, who has provided early warnings to us and has communicated broadly in the public about these events. So in the short term, and certainly for this particular weather event, you know, the technology and our capabilities exist to obtain early warnings. But the key issue, medium to longer term, is there's no doubt that, you know, we have a changing climate that is occurring not only, you know, in South Africa, but across sub-Saharan Africa and also the entire world.
Yeah.
So definitely, there is definitely a change in our climate. We definitely see that these events are becoming more frequent. And in some instances, they are becoming more, you know, significantly higher in magnitude.
Yeah.
But these are the matters that we are planning for and that we are planning within the, you know, the capacity that we have, so that when the events occur, that we are better prepared, that we communicate earlier to the public, and that we are able to, you know, and work towards reducing the magnitude and the severity and the impact of the event.
Is that capacity right now a little bit limited? I mean, to what extent are we displaying proactivity here in our preparation, in how, for example, we are dealing with this situation now of the snow with so many cars that are stuck on the N3 and N2 and other parts of the country?
Yeah, I think if we can look at this particular event, we have already received early warning of the matter earlier in the week. We were monitoring the situation. Our colleagues in KwaZulu-Natal, our colleagues in the Free State, and to a large extent, our colleagues in the Eastern Cape, you know, activated their respective joint operations centers as early as Thursday afternoon. They were communicating, you know, in the public, on social media, on a number of other platforms, you know, to the public to understand that there is severe weather that is expected. But I think we also need to recognize that early warning systems are not exact science as yet. They are still predictive in nature. And although we have done a lot of work in terms of not only understanding what the weather is going to be, but also understanding to a large extent what the weather is going to do, there are mechanisms, you know, to understand when to activate, for instance, our emergency procedures, but more important, when to actually trigger aspects of closing roads. We have to understand that we have to balance two things. One is if you close the roads too early and you don't have an event, you know, that can cause a lot of media outcry. But if you close it too late, or for that matter, if the amount of snow that falls is much more than what is predicted, or it falls in an area that, you know, is conducive to calling blockades, then you have to deal with that kind of event in terms of your preparedness planning and your, you know, your initial response actions.
So it was developed and established, shall I say, in one of the parliamentary responses, for example, if we look at the KZN's DMC, it was severely understaffed at the time. This was about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, at 50% capacity with 17 out of the 35 posts vacant there. Is the situation any different now?
Well, the situation, I mean, we have to essentially consider that in 2022, the cabinet also looked at these matters, not only in KZN, but across the country. And a decision was made by cabinet that we need to start a process to review the disaster management system in the country, not only to look at how our PDMCs and our municipal disaster centers are staffed, but also from a national perspective. But I think we also need to consider that although it's important for us to, you know, to build capacity within the provincial, national, and local disaster management centers, those centers to a large extent only play a coordination role and a planning role prior to event and during an event, coordination of national resources. So in as much as it is important to build capacity within our provincial, national and local centers to actually do the planning and coordination work, it's also critical that we mainstream disaster management within the organs of state. Our legislative framework, for instance, requires that all organs of state develop disaster management plans, the capacity to implement them, and to be able to respond. So as we are activating, and I'm aware that you have interviewed quite a number of individuals across the organs of state, these different organs, have to react and have to respond in their own right to assist people in the environment. The national center, for that matter, and provincial centers don't deploy individuals out in the field to do the actual work. They work with the sector departments and organs of state to coordinate the work better, to bring different mechanisms of response together, to understand where difficulties are, what the priorities is, where support is needed, and then to activate that support.
So you act as support. So things like staffing, things like budgeting, you'd say those would be the competencies of provinces and maybe the various centers at district level that would need to set aside money for that kind of response.
Well, I think the importance is that we always need to, we need to plan for these kind of events. And with the changing climate, with changing hazards that is occurring within our society, with urbanization, public vulnerability will and has changed in our country. And that's why I was referring earlier in the interview to the review of the disaster management system, so that we are able to look at whether or not our policy processes, our legislative framework, and our administrative capacity is in fact taking, and keeping pace with the changing demands that is placed not only on the disaster management systems, but in all organs of state. For instance, if you look at some of the issues that is happening in local government in terms of, maintenance on stormwater systems, it is not only funding that is is provided for instance, having capacity to respond to disasters, but it's also the work that we need to do to maintain our infrastructure, the work that we need to do in an integrated manner to plan for these kind of events. For instance, the rollout of safe drinking water is a significant contribution to reducing the risk of disasters and specifically health-related issues. So disaster management is not it's not a single entity function, it's an all-of-government function. And the better that we as government work together to plan for these kind of calamities and to plan to reduce the vulnerabilities that exist in communities, the better we will be at preventing these events happening in the first place, but secondly, reducing our impact, and then also be able to respond better when they do occur.
So from a national point of view, at what stage can South Africans be fully confident and comfortable that we have a fully fledged DMC component in all provinces that is able to respond to the sophisticated and complex operations geared for something like that we are facing right now, that is able to be seamless and the same everywhere, and that is able to happen without delay?
Look, I think in a developing country like our own, we will always have areas where we need to improve. I think one of the key aspects, for instance, from the National Disaster Management Center is that we have ongoing work in developing capacity. We have ongoing work where we work with our provincial, our national and local stakeholders to look at the capacity that exists, to look at the development of plans and all of those kind of things. But I think, we also need to be realistic. I don't think that we will get to a point where we would anywhere in the world would be able to say that we have enough resources in order to respond to every event without having a crisis. Because the tipping point would be is that when an event occurs and it exceeds your capacity, that leads to ultimately a disaster. So for me, the key principle is that we need to maximize the amount of resources that we can put into the system, not only to develop our communities better, but to also have a situation that when we have events, that we can come together. Today, as we speak, there's a number of joint operation centers that is operational, and where issues that has been identified, like for instance, people that has got stuck in the snow, where we would be able to work with the Department of Transport, the Department of Social Development, non-governmental organizations, and a cohort of other individuals to understand exactly and have situational awareness of what is happening. How do we integrate that information? How do we prioritize what needs to be done? And how do we focus as, you know, as society to actually to respond to the needs of those individuals?
Jurgens Dyssel, appreciate your time. He's the Chief Director at National Disaster Management Center there.